President Trump expected back at the White House shortly after his nearly 2-week trip in Asia. But just before he left the Philippines, he said the trip was outstanding.
We've had a tremendously successful trip. Tremendous amounts of work was done on trade. We want fair trade for the United States. Because with past administrations, as I said in China, and I've said very loud and very clear, the United States has been taken advantage of.
All right, we still don't have a lot of details on some of those trade deals, but the president is expected to make a, quote, major announcement tomorrow on trade and the trip. So after meetings with a number of world leaders, including Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, was the trip a success? Gordon Chang joins me, Daily Beast columnist and author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Welcome back, Gordon.
Thanks, Kennedy.
All right, so how would you grade the trip based on what we've seen?
The trip, I think, was a success. You have A's in Seoul and Tokyo. You have a lower grade in Beijing, much lower. But, you know, B's throughout the rest of the trip, Vietnam and the Philippines. You know, what he did was he reassured friends. He corralled 2 wayward allies, South Korea and the Philippines. And in Vietnam, he articulated a vision of trade that a lot of people don't like, but was realistic. The only problem is he wilted in Beijing, and that was unfortunate.
That's my question for you, because, you know, he makes these grandiose, very tough statements about China when he's not in the room with their president. So how do you handle that situation? Because obviously the appearance and appealing to President Xi's ego is very important.
Well, it is. But on the other hand, you know, we've been trying to do that for decades, where we sort of praise the Chinese and try to be cooperative in the hopes that they be cooperative back. Well, it doesn't work. What does work is you impose costs on the Chinese so they have no choice but to do what you want. Trump hasn't learned that yet. He knew that on the campaign last year. That's what you do. But he doesn't know that as president. So that really is unfortunate.
That was a cornerstone of his foreign policy campaigning, was his tough talk on China, saying he was going to designate them as a currency manipulator and that the trade was going to be vastly different. Now, you say one of the biggest mistakes the president made was not staying for that East Asia summit. How would that have made a big difference?
It makes a difference because here you have U.S. officials, and including the president himself, saying we're committed to the region, and then he decides, oh, I'm not going to stay the additional 30 minutes, which was really important to do. So that is something that was sort of an unforced error. Now, we can always make that up by having, you know, real commitments to the region and carrying through on them after the trip, like this major announcement tomorrow or the day after. That's going to be important. But it's also important what we do throughout. President Trump has some pretty good Asia policies that he's articulated before. He's putting them into practice now. He needs to continue to do that. He needs to have political will, because a lot of people are saying right now in China, he has no political will. And that's, you know.
But we see that happen with administration after administration. Same thing with, with Russia, and that's why it gets frustrating. But what I want to know from you, obviously, the 2 main objectives of the trip, deal with North Korea and come up with some solution for trade, since our country is pulled out of TPP. Where did he do best? Where did he succeed most, North Korea or trade?
Probably trade. He did, as I mentioned, talk about trade in terms that no American president has before. But he needed to do that because East Asian bureaucracies are using non-tariff barriers really to injure U.S. competitors.
Explain that.
Well, for instance, you have South Korea is a perfect example. It's a friend. So you have Qualcomm, a San Diego-based technology company, flagship company. And what happened last year was that a bureaucracy, the Korea Fair Trade Commission, imposed a $912.3 million fine and forced it to license its technology. Now,
same thing in China.
And same thing in China. But whatever the merits of that decision is, Qualcomm did not get the procedural benefits that were guaranteed by the U.S.-South Korea Free Trade Agreement. That, you know, President Trump should have talked about that in public. I hope he talks about it tomorrow, the day after, because whatever one thinks about Qualcomm, and there's a lot of controversy about that company, it deserves due process.
All right, there's also controversy about human rights. And, you know, countries like the Philippines and China don't want the president to talk about it because they know their records are abhorrent and they know what they're doing is wrong. How should the president have addressed human rights on this trip?
Well, certainly in the Philippines with a friend. You have Duterte, the president of the Philippines. There's about 12,000 deaths, basically state-sanctioned murder. They call it extrajudicial killings of drug dealers. Pretty awful. I think what the president, all he needed to do was to repeat the line from Senator McCain, which is, you know, for America, our our interests are our values, and our values are our interests. And that's really the bedrock of American policy. And when American presidents don't talk about human rights, everyone realizes that we're weak, and then bad things happen. If we stand up for our values, people say, oh, the United States is the bedrock of human rights in the world. That's really important for us.
And that's leadership. Hopefully we'll see more of that. Gordon Chang, thank you so much.